Hey, welcome back. So in this episode, we're going to improve that AI cover letter generator that we worked on the last time. So this time there's been a few changes. So let's review those changes now. So first of all, the look is a little bit different. I retitled it as a job search coach as opposed to kind of a cover letter because now there's additional features that aren't necessarily cover letter related. And you can see the previous cover letter, feature here. That still functions as it used to. And I'll talk about the changes that I did do in just a little bit here. But the major new thing that I added was this Q&A. So imagine that you had a real life job coach, someone that knew your experiences that knew your experiences, not just through your resume, but through additional information that you've shared with that person. And now imagine that you have some questions you want to ask. Hey, how would you summarize my skill set, or what do you think my top 5 attributes are? Those are the kind of questions that I want to be able to ask this AI job coach. Sometimes, when you're filling out resumes, you run into those kinds of questions. Hey, summarize in 400 words or less your experience, or tell me about this project. Tell me about one of your projects. That's what this feature is doing for you. So before we run a few examples, let's just cover the sidebar on the left-hand side. So the left-hand side is, I just kind of factored out some of those things that were kind of hard-coded before. So right now there's 3 different sources of data, and I'll talk about these in detail as we look at the code. But there's an app_data.js file, there's a resume.txt file, and there's a resume.pdf file. The original version, I was just using the resume.pdf, and I found that I think it was how my PDF is probably laid out. It's parsing it, and sometimes it was associating certain things with other jobs, and so I didn't like that. So I made it more linear. I just took the text out and I dumped that into a text file. So now it's more linear, and the AI has an easier time kind of figuring out which things are associated with which job and stuff like that. And then the third choice, app_data.js, might look familiar. If you recall that previous videos, we covered how we generated this portfolio. And this portfolio is driven from that app_data.js file. So it's a JavaScript file that has all of the data in it that is used to generate all of this information. This is much more information than that's just in my resume, right? So down here, when you start to look at some of the portfolio and the projects, each of these, then has a whole bunch of information in it. This is a lot richer data source than just my resume. And so by hooking it into the job coach knows even more about what I've done and my experience. And so you can change the different data sources by selecting which one you want to use. I'm going to keep it with the app_data, so that kind of rich content for now. At the very bottom, I gave you the ability to kind of select your language model. So now you can choose between GPT 3.5 Turbo and GPT-4. So I did find that using GPT-4 generated more human-like text. The other thing I found for GPT-4 is that I would reach the token limit for the tier that I'm on if I fed in app_data. Again, that's a lot more content. It's 3,800 words as compared to 1,100 words, so maybe 3 times as much. And so I would reach the token limit here and I would get an error. For this demo, I'm going to select the GPT 3.5 model since it's a little bit less expensive, and it allows me to feed in kind of the richer content. So let's come over to the experience section. I did create some prompts here at the very top. Let's just run a few of these and see what responses we get here. So when you do check this box, it has the ability to write it in your style. So your voice, your tone, your sentence structure. There's some sample text that's fed into the prompt. The prompt is engineered so that sample text is fed in, and the AI attempts to write it like you would write it. So I'm going to keep that checked for now. And we'll generate the thing. You can see it running up here. And you can see its response. So based upon my experience that I fed into it, this is what it found as my top 5 things that I should highlight from my work experience. And then it can ask it specific questions. It knows, again, this is because I fed in this app_data. It knows about my project. So let's say I want to summarize a certain project. So I can generate a summary for that project. here's a 3 to 4 sentence summary about the Asset IQ project that I worked on. And then in addition, you can see that I'm kind of varying the prompt. Here I'm asking for 3 to 4 sentences. Here I'm asking for a single paragraph. But you can vary the prompt so that you're getting a response that fits your needs. Sometimes I see, I'm limited to 400 characters or 1,000 characters. And so you can vary this prompt so that the AI engine will actually return to you the response that you need. And then the cover letter generator hasn't really changed much. So it's kind of the same thing, but I just kind of factored out some of the code that I was used to generate this, because now there's 2 features and they both use kind of the AI engine. And they both use kind of that same kind of input content, which is the candidate's content from like the resume and the writing style. Under the hood, there's more changes than what appears here on the UI. The UI hasn't really changed much. So just to kind of summarize what this does again is you can drop in a job description here that you copied off of, say, LinkedIn. You can put the title in here. You can put the company name. You can put the hiring manager and where you found this at, and any additional guidance. So, for example, maybe this job description is really asking for someone who has a lot of experience with a certain technology. So you want to highlight so maybe it's PHP in this case. And then again, write it in my style or not. This does send additional tokens to the AI engine. So ChatGPT, and you're limited by this number of tokens. So that's one way that you can kind of reduce the number of tokens. And you click the create cover letter. Then it goes off, it does its work. And then you get back a cover letter draft as a starting point, and then you can use that and refine that to make it more your own. But this draft is based upon that job description and how your experience that you provided to the AI overlaps with that. So it kind of really talks about your job experience and how you kind of fit this role. So as an example, you can see that I'm expressing interest in this role, and here it is. It's highlighting my PHP experience, which is what I asked it to do. And then it's citing specific examples of work that I've done at Genesis Care and different applications that I've worked on. So it is kind of blending in your experience that you've provided through this data file and the job description. So it's a good starting point. Before we get into the code itself, I wanted to make sure that you knew, and I'll put the link for this below, but this is all the code is up in GitHub, and I am continuing to work on it. So the code may not be exactly what it is that I'm showing you today, but it'll be pretty close. All right, so let's take a look at the code. First thing we're going to start with the app.py file. So this is a Streamlit app. Streamlit provides you a very quick way to get some UI with your Python applications, and it does a really good job. So I highly recommend using Streamlit for this type of application. We're going to go from top to bottom on this app.py, and you're going to see mostly what's in here is UI type content. So most of the features have been kind of refactored into their own separate classes, and we'll talk about those as we encounter them. So this will be less of a build it as we go type of thing and more of a code review type of session here. At the very top, you can see I'm loading the environment variables in. I do have a .env file. Here's the example. So what you would do to make this run on your own is you take this .env_example, copy and rename it to .env, and then you fill in your own information here. So your own OpenAI API key, and you put your name in there. And then the next couple of lines here, you can see where I'm instantiating objects of some classes that I created. So I put all of the code for the AI engine, and I encapsulated that into a class called AI engine. I put all of the features about the candidate, so how to read a resume, how to read the writing style, all those features. And again, I've refactored and I put them into a class called candidate, and here I have an instance of that candidate. And then finally, I have this class called coach, and coach is going to provide us all of the features that we need to be able to do here. So, ask the coach a question or summarize or create a cover letter for me. So that's what that class is for. And you can see in each of these cases, I'm feeding in parameters to the constructor. So the AI engine obviously needs the AI API key. The candidate itself needs the candidate name, and the coach, because it's going to coach on a specific candidate, it needs access to the candidate, and it also needs access to the AI engine. The next thing is we'll start to look at the Streamlit itself. So here we are just initializing the Streamlit page, putting the title at the very top and setting kind of the layout to wide. So this job title here, you can see that on the page. That's right there, obviously. All right, so the next bit of code is the sidebar itself. So I'm not going to dive into a lot of this. Streamlit makes it pretty easy to build sidebars and to build forms and just to build the whole page. Just using a number of Streamlit components like writing things, the candidate name, the resume source. You can see here's a select box. So that's this little box here where you can have the different resume sources and you can select which one you want to use. That does require use of the candidate object or the instance of the candidate, which knows the resume sources. And we'll cover these classes in just a little bit. But for now, just know that there's this candidate that has resume sources and it knows which sources are available. A couple more outputs for kind of resume size and the writing style word counts. Here's the features that allow you to kind of configure the large language model that we're using. And again, the AI engine knows which models are available, and the AI engine knows, what the current temperature is. So that's all coming from the AI engine, and then you can change and modify them here. And then the main page is broken up into 2 tabs. So you can see that here there's a Q&A tab, and then there's a cover letter tab. And then the Q&A tab, probably the largest piece, is this little markup at the very top that is just describing what the tab is used for and providing a couple of examples. And then here's where kind of the working parts of the Q&A tab are. So there's a summarized form. There's a prompt in there where you get to ask your question. And then there's the write in my style checkbox. So that's there. And then the submit button. And then when you click submit, again, this is where now we're using some of those objects that we created earlier. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask our coach to summarize based upon the prompt that we give it and whether we want it to write in our style or not. This is one of the things that I like about object-oriented programming is you have these objects and you're kind of using more natural language when you code. I'm saying, hey, coach, summarize, and here's my inputs. And so you can kind of see that, and then we're just writing the output of that. And tab 2, the cover letter tab, again, we covered most of this in the previous video, but there's a header, and then we create this form, and here's all the inputs for the form. And then at the very bottom, there's a submit button. So you can kind of see all of these inputs are here. And this is where kind of the form does the work. Again, we're using the coach object, and we're saying we would like a cover letter. And then we're providing the information from the form to the coach. And then the coach will summarize and give us a cover letter back. So given that that's what the UI looks like, let's start to look at some of these classes. All right, so let's take a look at the AI engine class first. The single responsibility theorem is part of object-oriented programming. And what you want to try to do is make every object responsible for one thing. And so this class, AI engine, kind of encapsulates the AI aspect of this application. And so this is the only place in the code that understands or that even knows that there's some OpenAI API out there. The rest of the application just thinks that it's just coming from this AI engine. So that makes it easy for me in the future, or for you, if you want to fork this project, you can swap from OpenAI implementation of the AI kind of chat to something different. You shouldn't have to do a lot of code changes beyond, changing the implementation of this class. So if we look at the details, obviously I'm using OpenAI for this implementation. I did take an API key as part of the constructor, and we fed that in earlier. So I'm setting the API key to AI itself, and I'm kind of saving an instance of this AI so I can use it kind of below. Here, I'm setting the different models that are available, and that's used for this dropdown right here. So that's where the information for this dropdown comes from. So it's a property that's part of my class, and I just have this list. And over here, I'm just kind of looping through and just kind of showing you what's available. And then here's the selected model. So when you actually go and you select one, and you change the model, this gets set. And you can see that in the app. In the sidebar right here. So over here, AI is an instance of my AI engine. and you can see I'm setting the selected model, but I have the select box and it uses all of the models. And then there's this temperature property also. So that again is controlled by the sidebar. So I set it here, but it's based upon the number input. And then the value that I feed into that is the actual current value for temperature. So right now it's 0.9, but I can change it to whatever I want, and then it'll reflect that in the class. And then this AI engine just has one method on it. So the only method here is this get prompt response. And it only takes a list of messages, and that's it. And it provides a string in return. Under the hood, again, we're using OpenAI's chat completion API. And so you can see that here, and we've feed in the model, the temperature, and then that list of messages. And then when we get the response back, again, this is specific knowledge of how OpenAI has implemented this, but now we're digging down and getting the response, and we're just returning the string that we're interested in. So all of that encapsulation of how OpenAI does its business behind, so how the API works and all of that stuff, and how to kind of convert the responses that it gives you back, that's all encapsulated in this class. The other class I want to cover right now while we're talking about the AI and what engine we're using is this prompt class, because this is related to OpenAI. This is building a prompt based upon how OpenAI wants their prompts to look like. So if you do switch engines, these are the two classes that you probably will have to change. So if you look at this prompt class under the hood, it's just a list of messages, and that list of messages is eventually going to get fed into kind of the get prompt response. But this prompt provides three methods here. So add system message, add user message, and add message. This is the more kind of generic message down here, and these two just kind of call or default down to that one. So you can see here, add a system message is we're just calling add message, and we're setting the role to system. Add user message is we're calling that, and then we're setting the role to user. So these two are just kind of helper methods. As you're kind of using this class, it allows you to kind of quickly add messages based upon the different kind of roles. So one of the things I'll hint at right now, we'll come back and cover it in detail in a little bit, is this coach prompt. So this coach prompt uses the prompt as a base class, and so you can see that here. But there's other details in coach prompt that we need more information about before we can kind of talk about. So let's come back to that. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is the class called candidate. And candidate itself, the purpose of candidate here is to encapsulate everything to do with the candidate itself. So, the resume, the name, the writing style, all of that is kind of placed in this one class. And so you can kind of see that here, the constructor takes the candidate name, which we set locally. And then there's a couple of private properties on this class, and we'll cover those in just a little bit. But here's a couple of public properties that we intend on exposing. And then there's also a couple of private methods that we'll talk about in a second. But candidate name, the resume resources. So this is this drop-down list right here. So these three resources have been discovered. And so I'll show you how that discovery happens. It's pretty simple. And then the writing style. So that's also right here. So the writing style is, right now there's 308 words in the writing style. So in addition to kind of these public properties, we are declaring a couple of other properties here in the class itself. So there's really kind of two more public properties down here that we're exposing. One is it's called resume source. Here's the getter for that, and here's the setter for that. So, and these are used, as part of the UI. So when you have this drop down that shows the different sources, and then when you select a source, this is where you're actually using the setter for this. And you can see that in the UI over here. So select box, here's the getter for all the sources. Again, that is resume sources. That's this list right here, and I'll show you that in a second, but that's where that's coming from. And then in the UI, when you actually select one of those, you're using the setter for resume source, and that's right here. So you're actually setting this kind of private property to whatever value you have. And then one more property here. This is based upon, the selected source. So whatever source you've selected, this is getting the resume text for that source. And this property is just using the dictionary, which you can see here, of resume sources, the text from all the resume sources, and then it's giving you the one that's for the selected source. And then, okay, let's go over quickly these three private methods here. And these are executed only once, but during the when you actually create the class. And the discover resume sources is going to use this list of local files. And these local files correspond to kind of the data sources for the resume. So here's the app_data, here's resume.txt, and here's resume.pdf. So if you have those kind of in your root directory, that's what we're going to do in the discover, is we're going to find out of those sources, which ones exist. If they exist, we're going to add them to kind of the list of available sources, which is shown at this dropdown. And then this little bit of code is just selecting, it's kind of initializing which resume source that we're using. And it just defaults to the very first one that it finds. The next method is read resume. So based upon the resume sources that we just discovered, it loops through each of these and it extracts the text from each of those. So if the resume source is a PDF, we're using the PDF reader class. If it's just a text file, we're just using kind of the normal, text file classes and just reading the lines from it. But in the end, we build up this dictionary where the key is the source file name and the value is the text that's inside that source file. And then up here, when you're returning the resume text, that's where this dictionary is used, right? So this is the dictionary, this is the key, and then we're getting the text for whatever that selected source is. And then the final method here is this read sample writing method. And so that's pretty simple. Again, so it looks for a text file called sample_writing_style.txt. It does find that file. Then what it does is it reads that file, puts all the content into kind of this property. So that's the candidate class, just kind of encapsulating everything about the candidate. So if you want to know what the resume text looks like, or you want to know what their writing style looks like, or their name, those are the three big things that are coming out of this. So next, let's look at the coach class. So you can see at the very top, this class has two properties for the constructor. The first is the candidate, which is an instance of the candidate class. And then you have this AI property, which is an instance of the AI engine. So the coach has access to everything about the candidate, and it also has access to everything about the AI engine and the behaviors of that. And so then if you look at the kind of main behaviors of this coach, which are summarized in cover letter, both of them follow the same pattern. So the first thing the coach does is it builds up the prompt that it's going to send over to the AI engine. And then the second thing it does is it gets the response from the AI engine. And you can see that down here also. So this is for the cover letter. The prompt is a little more complex, but you can still see here we're building up the prompt all the way down to this right down through there, building the prompt, and then we're getting the prompt response from the AI, and then we just return that information. So I'm not going to cover all the details of what's all in these specific prompts, but I am using a coach prompt class here for this. So now we're starting to get into kind of a domain specific prompt. For our particular application, this is a job coach. We want to be able to create domain specific prompts for our application. And again, this implements the base class prompt, and we covered prompt already, which is kind of a very generic prompt. It is based upon OpenAI's expectation of what they want from their API. So that's encapsulated here. But coach prompt now is a superclass of that. And so what you see in this class coach prompt are some very domain specific prompt generations. And so for example, this add resume is a domain specific prompt generation helper. So add resume takes the candidate, which again, that's the instance of the candidate class. So it knows all about the candidate's resume, the writing style, everything. And we're adding in two prompts that are related to the candidate's resume. So the name of the candidate and the resume text itself. And so you can see this method, which is part of the coach prompt, you can see that being used by the coach here. So it creates an instance of the coach prompt, and here it adds the resume. Same thing down here when it does the cover letter. It creates an instance of the coach prompt, and then we're adding the resume. By encapsulating this code into kind of some domain specific helpers, it's reusable. And then if I want to change the prompts for when I add the resume in here to kind of engineer a better prompt, then I can change that in one spot. And then the coach is using it everywhere it needs a resume prompt. Same thing for the add writing style. So again, I'm not going to go over the details, but this add writing style adds 3 new prompts to it. And you can see that being used over here in both cases. So when I want to summarize it, if you check the box, then I add the writing style. When I do the cover letter, if you check the box, we use that and we add the writing style prompts. And then I did forget here, so at the very top, when you create a coach prompt, we're initializing this with some messages here also. So we're initializing all right out of the gate with 3 system messages, kind of setting up the system so that it understands what its role is. So, you are a job search coach and you're providing professional guidance. All generated text must be written in, as if the candidate's writing it. And so this is in one specific spot. So if I need to kind of tweak this system messages, I just tweak it once. All right. So again, just to summarize the coach again here. So the coach has 2 behaviors, has summarize and it has cover letter. And so summarize, both of these follow that same thing where it builds the prompt, and then it uses the AI engine here that it's fed in the constructor to get the prompt response. And then you can see that it uses this coach prompt and kind of relying on some of these helper methods that already were built, but then it also uses kind of the base class to add some other messages. So here's a system message. You're helping the candidate summarize their work. So we're not doing a cover letter here. This is the summary. We wanted to summarize their work. Down here, we're adding a system message when we want to do the cover letter, saying you're helping a candidate generate a cover letter. So we're kind of setting up the system so that it creates the response that we want it to create. Part of the art of, creating an AI chat engine and getting the response that you want is this prompt engineering. So iteratively, you kind of start to add a prompt, you tweak it, you add another prompt, and so eventually you get it to the point where now the AI is returning kind of what you expected. And so that's what all of this information is. We added additional content, we're setting the different expectations on what the system should do, using system messages and also what the user is expecting using user messages. And then eventually we get the prompt that we want. So that kind of concludes, looking at all the different code. I'm pretty happy with where this is at right now. It's pretty useful as far as, my particular needs go. It knows about me. I can ask it specific questions. It gives me some text that I can use as kind of a draft, and then I can make that my own. And so that's pretty useful. So both in the kind of the summary tool and also the cover letter. So both of these are very useful for me. The one thing that I did notice was definitely ChatGPT-4. Again, it returns a lot more human-like text. And when you use kind of a tool to kind of test whether or not the piece of text was AI generated, GPT-4 was passing that test. So it was not being detected as AI generated, a lot more than GPT 3.5. Even after all the prompt engineering I did for, writing like a human or, making it the voice, tone, structure of, the actual candidate itself, GPT-4 is still better than GPT 3.5. 2 downsides with that. One is the cost. GPT-4 is significantly more expensive than GPT 3.5. And the second thing is right now at my tier again is the token limit. So that's it for this video. If you have questions or comments, put those below.